There's different types of toy fans. There are those who collect and those who spectate. If you're a spectator, then you might have missed out on one of the nuances of the toy line and its evolution, and that's how it's being distributed. Just to set the stage, shodo largely involves splitting the figure between two boxes. This usually means the base body is in one box, and the armor is in the other box. This format made a lot of sense when it debuted in Xade because the majority of the form changes involved attachable armor on the upper body. But it also had the added benefit of providing a higher budget to the figures by giving them the budget of 2 figures combined, or at least that's how I see it. With all these figures being split into 2 parts, you might think it may be a little bit trickier to collect, but importers have the benefit of the shops selling them in a particular format. Import shops will usually call these like a set of something or a box, but we call them case assortments. You're buying the kind of set that a shop might get, and this is how shodo carried itself for the first couple of years. During its second year, however, Kamen Rider Build pulled a surprising change that was probably worth adding in my top 10 unprecedented shodo editions. They started to produce box sets for these waves. Granted, they didn't do it often. It seemed to be a special occasion. The first wave got a box set, then 1 or 2 other waves also got them, and they happened to include notable content, so it was probably just a sure thing that these would sell. But the next year with Kamen Rider Geo, the box set format became a standard. And with Geo, we would also learn one of the bigger flaws of this box set format. Now let's talk more about that armor gimmick for Xade. The shodo line, as officially stated on their blog, is meant to be played with, rather than having each figure permanently displayed in just one form. But of course, you have folks like me who like the idea of displaying everything in one big collection, and it's also like a really inexpensive figure line, so why not? Since a lot of the show doesn't really have this armor gimmick, most of Xade worked out fine. You needed some bodies to go with some of the armors, but it wasn't a huge deal since there were only so many forms, and usually they would remember to reissue a body for a later wave. And for Build, his form change gimmick meant that each combination gave you a full figure, so there were barely situations where you needed to have extra bodies. But Geo had a different approach. The form changes involved Geo and Gates changing into an armored body with alternate helmets, shoulders, chest, and thighs between the different armor designs. Now, Mr. D, who was in charge of shodo at the time, explained that they considered making a set of armor that attached to the original figures, but it would look a little bit too bulky, wouldn't look entirely show accurate, and it probably would have messed with their budget, so it was decided that they would make a dedicated body for the ride armors. Now, unsurprisingly, making a whole new pair of bodies for this was kind of costly, and it didn't help that in addition to all the content from the show, they would actually go out of their way to make figures for every Legend Rider armor you saw on the deluxe Ride Watch packaging. I could go over the wave contents, but I'll just give you a visual aid to give you an idea of how these armors were distributed. You had 2 to 4 armors in one wave, and maybe only one body to go with it. Or at least one body that was meant to go with it. Now, for those collecting with the intent of displaying everything, this meant that the blog was actually really useful for letting us know what duplicates we might need to purchase in advance. It's also worth noting that the shortage of bodies was not just an issue among importers. Like, one of the most notable things to happen during Geo, for me, was when they gave an important advance notice about Wave 6 on the blog, where they specifically said that it would include double armor, Agito armor, and Hibiki armor. Like, they revealed them well in advance just to say, just so you know, there are no bodies in this wave to go with them, so get them while you can, while they're still on the market. Even when the hunt seemed to be over, Decade Armor had subforms, which would eventually enter the line. Build form was innocuous enough, then you had X-Aid form L and R, which required you to buy 2 copies of the armor, because it had stickers for both forms. So that was probably a cost-cutting measure on their part. The same approach would also be used for the other ones, such as O's form and Go's form, and then the last time with Ryuki form and Vi's form. Right, so let's not forget about the box set, shall we? So you know how I said that there was a problem with them? They only provided you with 1 of every item in the wave, so buying the box set meant you were skipping the case assortment format and just getting 1 of everything. Now, like I said before, the case assortments, they didn't really remedy the issues, so paying a little bit more for a case assortment actually didn't help you much. Because here's the thing, Shodo is this body and armor format, which meant if you get a case of 10, then that means you're getting 5 figures. And if there's even any room for duplicates, then it's gonna be the usual approach to duplicates in a case assortment, which is that they're going to be promoting whatever's most popular or most important, such as a fan favorite character or the latest power-up form at the time. Anyway, how much does this matter in the grand scheme of things? Was this even on Bandai's radar? Surprisingly, yes! The Candy Toy blog was well aware of collectors who displayed all the variants, as we would learn with one of the biggest changes in Kamen Rider 01. To show how super serious they were with improvements, the blog would do multiple posts counting up the many ways that they were improving with 01. One of those more specific ways is when they announced that the distribution would account for every form. That meant that there would be a body for every armor. And they specifically demonstrated this with the first wave, which would include 01's Rising Hopper, Biting Shark, and Flying Falcon. And if you were to get a case assortment or the box set, which they rebranded as the complete set, you would get a body with each armor. The complete set was also using the same logic as the case assortment, which meant that there would be a body for every armor. And during the time that 01 had form changes where that applied, they stuck true to that. Now, this was a big deal at the time. And of course, as things usually go, the form change gimmick from the start of the series does eventually fade away, so that promise technically doesn't mean much going forward. Even so, there were those of us collecting it this way, and the company specifically catered to us. It was a good time to be a Shodo fan. And when 01 was starting to come to a close, we had a bit of a surprising bit of news from the blog. The first wave of Kamen Rider Saber would be the last time that they would do the box sets. At the time, we weren't sure what that meant, especially due to how vague and short that news actually was. And at the time of recording this, there really hasn't been a follow-up on that, so, that's all we really know, is that they decided to stop. Now, we're a few months into Saber. I could sit here and speculate about how the form change gimmick was probably a factor in this decision, but I think we have a more obvious culprit on this one. Remember what I said about the distribution in 01 and how they were accounting for every form? That applied to both the case assortment as well as the box set. Well, if both of those are accomplishing the same thing, do you really need both of them to exist? Based on the vague idea of production timelines that we can get from the blog, it seems like there's at least a 6 to 8 month difference between when things are being produced and when we find out about them. My theory is that when the 2020 pandemic was really starting to take effect, Bandai was probably thinking to themselves that they could cut some costs by removing the box sets. After all, imagine how much time and money probably goes into producing those box sets alone. Like, I'm not even talking about like the cardboard box. I mean, you gotta assume they're producing extras specifically to go in this wholly separate box set. So this would probably save them a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. But hey, that's just a theory. A toy theory. Thanks for playing. In all seriousness though, take what I say with a grain of salt. I'm just using Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is usually the right one. A I wanted to go into this with a paragraph or two about the fact that Shodo is actively unable to do every form from the show, but honestly, I might just be salty about old Dragon Peter. He died so young. The reality is, Bandai's business and their reason for changing distribution is more than likely to do with money. I mean, after all, Shodo keeps spending all that money on paint. They gotta do something. Let us know what you think in the comments. And if you want to engage in these kind of conversations with fellow toy enthusiasts, we have a Discord server, link in the description. Also in the description are ways that you can support the Black Lives Matter movement, and ways that you can find us on social media. Thanks for watching, subscribing, liking, and keep it juicy.